Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. Today we finally get to talk about the Darkspawn. This is a video I've been meaning to make for a long time. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Gilda Thalin and her Darkspawn lore video. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you go check it out. It's a good refresher, if nothing else. So let's get started here with the basics. The Darkspawn follow the old god's calling, and when they get to one, it's tainted and becomes an archdemon. Why the Darkspawn follow the calling is unknown, at least to most of the world. Some of the Awakened, and even a few dying Grey Wardens and ghouls, describe it as beautiful music. The Grey Wardens are believed to have a huge hoard of secret knowledge in their fortress at Weishaupt, so it's plausible that they do know the details. But besides the Grey Wardens, there's also the Blighted Codex, which is where most of the Darkspawn Codex entries come from in Inquisition. It's a classified document held in the Imperial Library of Minrathous, and it's accessible only to the Magisterium. Full disclosure, freaking awesome name and freaking awesome concept. I'm a bit of a nerd, but we better get to see this library in the next game. Even if we don't get to read the documents, I just want to see the building. I'm serious, I have a thing for architecture, but of course, in all likelihood, if we get to see the library, then we'll also get to read a decent amount of excerpts from the documents. I'm gonna be like a kid in a candy store. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, let's talk about Darkspawn Intelligence. A few codex entries stand out here. Let's start with the Herlock Alpha. The one in question here isn't just able to speak, but form complete thoughts. It also quite clearly explains the nature of Darkspawn.
There is no talk, no negotiation. You will die. Your world will die.
Anyway, the Blight is the driving force of the Darkspawn, and this entry plainly describes the Blight's nature. Evil, meant only to pollute and destroy. Now, a Darkspawn Alpha's intelligence is higher than its common brethren. It's because of this that Alphas often lead small groups. According to the World of Thetis Volume 1, Darkspawn don't become Alphas, they're simply born Alphas. So it has nothing to do with how long they've been alive or anything, I guess they just naturally have a greater capacity for thought. On the other hand, there are Darkspawn Emissaries. Also according to the World of Thetis, Emissaries are Alphas capable of practicing magic. What this says about the one Emissary Alpha we encounter during the descent, I'm not sure. All I can figure is that this one is even more intelligent than most other emissaries. The emissaries we encounter in Origins are quite different than what we see in 2 and Inquisition. In the Origins Codex, the Herlock entry states that Herlock emissaries are the only Darkspawn to that date known to be capable of speech. Of course, we know that's not actually true. On the other hand, Genlock emissaries are said to be the most intelligent Genlock Alphas. Since 2, we haven't seen any other emissaries besides these standard floating guys, most, if not all of which have pointed ears. Completely ignoring that, emissaries practice blight magic, which is often described as being akin to blood magic, but it's certainly very different. Blight magic, as you could probably guess, is magic that draws from the blight. Unlike normal magic, it does not come from the Fade. If anything, it comes from the Void, but that's debatable. It could merely be the blight being manifested independently from the Void. Now, I want to talk more about blight magic, but for the sake of time and my own sanity, I'm going to make a whole other video for that. Right now, I want to talk more about Darkspawn Society, if we can even call it that. I mentioned before that Alphas will often be leading small groups of Darkspawn. They exert dominance by bullying others, inciting loyalty out of fear. Lesser Darkspawn also follow the Architect out of fear in the Calling. Small bands will often fight with each other in the deep roads for dominance. Emissaries are usually at the top, but the fact of the matter is that if there's no Archdemon to lead them, there's no real structure of command. I find this to be odd because the Darkspawn are often painted as mindlessly following the old god's call. Shouldn't most of them just be continually digging in that direction? I mean, I guess not, but I don't really see why. Emissaries, being the most intelligent of the Darkspawn, have coherent thought, but they also instruct the other Darkspawn to serve as finding the old gods. So it would appear that coherent thought and independent thought are not the same thing. The only Darkspawn known to have independent thought are the Awakened, and the Sidereal Magisters, but I'll come back to them. The Awakened attained sentience when the Architect put them under a modified joining ritual. This is a whole other bag of weirdness. For starters, I was confused where their intelligence actually came from, and for that matter, their personalities. Does this imply that what we see here was always present, and the removal of the calling simply allowed it to come forth? But how would that make sense? The Darkspawn spend their lives killing and digging. Even if they have a personality, shouldn't it be reflective of the environment they were raised in? The other option would be that the Architect frees them, and then they're suddenly able to think for themselves. That makes sense, but then how quickly does this personality grow? Apparently, the Architect's disciples saw him as their savior, so their service to him is understandable. Maybe he spent some time to teach them stuff. Now, he was at this for several years before awakening, so I can see that being the case. Yeah, that's what I'm going with. The only other option I can think of is that their intelligence and personality is baselined by either the broodmother that they came from or from the old god's calling. Maybe the calling is beyond comprehension as we understand it, but that doesn't mean that our or their subconscious doesn't pick up on it. Yeah, no, I'm going with the architect teaching them theory. But speaking of broodmothers, I think it's time we move on to the origins of all Darkspawn. Darkspawn are birthed by broodmothers. Broodmothers are female ghouls that have undergone, well, a very long, very evil process. But I want to look back to the very first blight. The Sidereal Magisters returned to the world from the Black City. Everything they touch becomes infected with a taint. People start being infected. I can see that leading to an epidemic since no one had ever seen it before. However, most of the infected should have died outright. Only a small percentage would have become ghouls. The ghouls then, what? Wandered around searching for Dumonts? That should have involved going underground, and I have a hard time believing that the ghouls would have been numerous enough to get past the dwarves at the time. In order to pose a significant threat, they would need numbers, which I don't think they could have had without broodmothers. I also somehow doubt that ghouls alone would have put women through that long process, especially since it doesn't always work. Just like other ghouls, only a handful of potential broodmothers survive. I mentioned this in my Magister Sidereal episode, but what if one of them deliberately created the first broodmother? Looking at this codex entry for a different Darkspawn, it describes what we can reasonably conclude to be 3 of the Magisters. One in particular killed and ate one of the others. All of them have been changed in some way, some more than others. Nevertheless, speculating on what we know of each of the Magisters and their patron deities, I would think the most likely culprit for creating the first broodmother would be either the Madman of Chaos or the Augur of Mystery. I would consider the Watchman of Night as well, but I have another idea for him. Maybe another video. Now, before I move on, I want to talk about these names. They are so lame compared to the Conductor of Silence and the Architect of Beauty. Along the lines of those names, the Madman should be called the Director of Chaos. That's way cooler and more in line with the others. The Augur of Mystery, on the other hand, come on. The Detective, or at least the Cipher or something. Analyst, Inspector, Assessor, anything but the Augur. Razikale, the Goddess of Mystery, deserves nothing but the best, and you have failed her, Augur, with your stupid name. Anyway, I would think the Madman would simply do this to embody chaos, which is the sphere his god had claimed. On the other hand, I can believe that it was the Augur that had done it in a bid to solve the mystery of the taint, immorally doing anything he could to try and understand it, and broodmothers came as a result of his experiments. A few things I want to know before I move on. The dwarves have their own explanation of where Darkspawn came from. The most prominent codex entry I could find on the subject comes from Valta's journal in the Descent. If we look here, she says, it's a given that the Chantry's beliefs about Darkspawn's origins are nonsense. They were not cast down from a fabled city. They crawled up from the deep recesses of the earth. Wow. You know what? I'm not even going to get into it. We know that Darkspawn come from broodmothers. Perhaps at the very heart of our world sits a queen, the first mother. Instead of focusing on her children, we should target broodmothers to ensure that future reinforcements will never be born. Despite her obvious and infuriating conjecture, that bit about the first mother does grab my attention. It's the dwarven belief that Darkspawn appeared in the deep recesses of the earth. As far as they're concerned, that is what happened. They didn't witness what happened with Tevinter. To their knowledge, the Darkspawn just appeared. Especially modern dwarves, since most of the recorded information from that time would have been lost with the rest of their tags. But remember what I was saying before? About how the Darkspawn grew in numbers before toppling the Dwarven Empire? If the dwarves say that Darkspawn came from deep underground, it seems fair to say that that's where the first broodmothers were created. But I want to mention a theory I found truly interesting. In contrast to one of the Magisters creating the first broodmother, what if one of the Magisters was the first broodmother? This idea was brought up by a commenter on my Sidereal episode, and I like it a lot. The idea is that one or more of the Magisters was female, and while the males became these emissaries, the females became unique broodmothers. The problem I find with this theory is mobility. I don't want to think about a broodmother moving, if they even can. One way or another, this sidereal broodmother would have had to find her way underground in order to survive. The other problem is, if she has the same ability as Corypheus to possess other tainted bodies, how can she be reborn in the body of a common Darkspawn, or even a male Grey Warden or Ghoul? Maybe just blight magic solves that problem, but I'm declaring that a dumb explanation. Maybe she specifically possesses other human broodmothers or female tainted bodies. In any event, I do really like this idea. I think that would not only be a great explanation for Darkspawn gaining numbers so quickly, but also be an interesting plot device in future games. Imagine coming face to face with the first Broodmother, the Sidereal Broodmother. Moving on from that, there's one more thing I want to mention. I want to talk about how Dumont may have been awoken. Best I can tell, it was within a year after the Darkspawn first appeared. That's very quickly, considering how long apart the other Blights have been. All I can assume is that one or several of the other Magisters sought out his prison. In the games, that is a legitimate theory from scholars, whether of lingering devotion or desire for vengeance. I also want to note something I find peculiar. The Grey Wardens only discovered Corypheus after Dumont's defeat, over 200 years after the first appearance of Darkspawn. The first Blight began in 800 TE. Dumont was properly slain in 992, and the Blight officially ended by 1000. The discovery of Corypheus was around 1004. That's when the Wardens set about capturing him. The even stranger part is that he was found leading a decent amount of other Darkspawn. His memory of all that may have dwindled during his long imprisonment. Of course, we see his memory start coming back to him when he's awoken in Legacy. He may remember all that by the time Inquisition takes place, but maybe not, and I'm not sure it matters anyway. All I mean to say here is that Corypheus may have been involved in Dumont's Awakening. Or maybe it was the others, I don't know, I'm tired. I better wrap this up now. Be sure to leave a comment if you have your own ideas about all this. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember, Tala Nadas.